Well, good morning to each of you. It is good to be here and to worship together. Gerald mentioned the deacons' pulpit exchange where we get around to the different churches, and I was looking back a little bit. I think it felt like it was almost 2 years, I think, since I was here the last time, and then now I'm here within about 6 weeks or so. Bear with it one more time. Probably, so we worship together, look into God's Word. Enjoyed the time here already. As Boyd was ministry of movement, as we talked about movements this morning, was Jesus' ministry of movement. You would say, we look at the religious leaders back in Jesus' time. There's a lot of them miss the ministry of Jesus in their, and so it's a challenge for me. We look at movements come, movements go, but our relationship. Good to be here. This morning I would ask you another question as well. If you had to put a finger on it, what would you say is the most important? I believe followers of Christ are the most important. Aside from the most important thing in life. I don't know where your mind goes to. Thought of a couple different things. I mean, health, consider family or other things important, happy. A lot of things to be important. Well, this morning, of a belonging to my people. These are my friends. I have relationship, I have connection with these people. Relationship first with God, and then secondly, relationship with each other. Healthy, God-honoring relationships with each other. And I know I've used this before, but Genesis 3, I think, gives us a picture of connection. Here, we talked about firelighting. I've been going through a book of different break our connection with God, and Genesis 3 is where I was going to with this idea of connection. I know, like I said, I've used it before, but in Genesis 2, verse 25, it says that Adam and Eve were in the garden, they were naked, and they were not ashamed. Everything was good, everything was right. Husband and wife living in harmony in relationship. In chapter 3, then it talks about God walking through the garden in relationship with Adam and Eve, just as God had designed it to be. That is, until disobedience, until sin entered into this relationship, and then we find Adam and Eve, they're hiding, they realize that they're naked, they're ashamed, and so they're hiding themselves from God. Sin brings separation, sin brings disconnect. And so that is kind of the basis of what we're going through, the firelighting. We were talking about when things go dark, when we're walking through darkness, we tend to try to forge ahead and to find a system that's going to give us hope in life rather than trusting God with what the future has. And so this morning I'd like to look at another metaphor, and that's called whitewashing. Now, whitewashing, I'm told, is a technique that involves applying a mixture of water and either lime or paint to walls to create a soft, milky white finish. Whitewash is generally cheap, and it can be used to quickly give a uniform, clean appearance to a wide variety of surfaces. I think it would have been used a lot for inside barns, inside chicken coops, or walls, surfaces of any kind. I read somewhere that back in Bible times, builders, in order to save money, in order to save time, would stack bricks, make a wall, but they wouldn't put any mortar in between those bricks, and then they would whitewash this wall with this whitewash, a thin veneer of plaster, to cover up their fraud. It might have looked solid from the outside, but without the mortar, the wall didn't have any strength. Now, I was thinking about whitewash. I don't know. I haven't seen it in years. I don't know. Maybe it's still done some places. But I remember as a boy, there was an old order Amish farm that was close to where we would go for groceries. And so when we would go for groceries, we'd drive past this farm. And I remember seeing it whitewashed. The fence posts, the fence boards, everything was painted white. They had the trees, they had painted up about this high or so around the trees, just whitewashed. And it gave this appearance of clean and neat and things just taken care of. The thing is with whitewashing, it's a quick cover-up. The blemishes aren't taken care of. If you would take a quick look at those posts, you would see that the splinters are still there. The bark on the trees still had dirt on it, and this whitewash was something that was just covered up. And so this morning, as we think about whitewashing, the idea is that we look at ourselves. This morning, as I look at each of you sitting out there, you look good. Your hair is combed, you're dressed up, we smell good. It looks good. It looks great from the outside. Is it a whitewash? Is it a coat of paint that we put over ourselves over unresolved conflict, or is it authentic? Whitewashing is the act of minimizing or covering up a bad or undesirable character trait or habit that is generally considered morally wrong with the intention to improve someone's reputation. So it's a concealment of covering flaws, failures, blemishes, or unpleasant facts about ourselves. The word or the idea of whitewash is mentioned, I'm not exactly sure how often it's mentioned. I found about 3 or 4 different times that it's mentioned in the Bible. Jesus used some pretty strong language in Matthew in chapter 23 when he was talking to the scribes and Pharisees. He said, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, then the outside will also be clean." Now, I'm not an expert in washing dishes. I've done it enough that I know that the bulk of the dirt is usually on the inside, right? If you get the inside clean, most times the outside just takes a quick wash around and it's done. So if you're washing a bowl of soup, generally you put it in the sink and you focus on the inside, get that clean, and then the outside is done. I believe that's a picture of what Jesus is teaching here. First, get the inside clean, and then the outside also will be clean. He goes on then and says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of dead and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness." They look good on the outside, but on the inside they're full of decay. They're full of they're not representing vitality. In Luke 11, verse 44, Jesus gave the analogy to the scribes and Pharisees. Again, he said, "For you are like concealed tombs, and the people who walk on them are unaware of it." And I believe this is pointing back to the time of the Passover. Again, as I studied, I read that they would go through Jerusalem and they would whitewash all the tombs that were around the city. And the idea of that is well, let me getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Thought I had a slide in there. I don't. In Numbers 19, verse 16, for somebody that would contact as part of the law, somebody that would come in contact with a dead person or would step on the grave, there was a period of cleansing that had to follow that for them to cleanse themselves. And that's in Numbers 19, verse 16. It says, "Whosoever touches one that is slain with the sword in the open fields, or a dead body, or a bone of man, or a grave, shall be unclean 7 days. And for an unclean person they shall take the ashes out of the burnt heifer of purification for sin, and running water shall be put thereto in a vessel. And a clean person shall take hyssop and dip it in the water, and sprinkle it upon the tent and upon all the vessels, and upon the persons that were there, and upon him that touched a bone, or slain one, or one dead, or a grave. And the clean person shall sprinkle upon the water, and the clean person shall sprinkle upon the unclean on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day. And on the 7th day he shall purify himself, and wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and shall be clean at even. But the man that shall be unclean shall not purify himself. That soul shall be cut off from among the congregation, because he hath defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of separation hath not been sprinkled upon him. He is unclean." So what was happening is in Jerusalem they had these tombs, and so if they weren't marked very clearly, people would be from outside the area would be walking through Jerusalem, and they would accidentally walk on a grave site, a tomb, and they would become unclean. And so as we read from Numbers 19, the act of cleansing, fairly significant steps to take to become clean again. And so what they would do is they would go through and whitewash these tombs to make them more visible. All right, you can Ezekiel 13, 10 to 16 is where the verses that I'll be pulling out here talking about whitewashing. And that verse 10 says, "Because they lead my people astray." Again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Let me back up just a little bit. The setting here in Ezekiel is that Ezekiel was a true prophet of God. He had been telling the people to repent of their sins and to turn to God. Their sins of that time included idolatry, adultery, child sacrifice, violence, rebellion to God, a long list of sin that they were engaging in. And Ezekiel was telling them to turn from their sin and to repent. However, the people didn't like that repentance message, and they chose to listen to the false prophets of the day instead. Now, these people were still worshiping at the Sabbath, on the Sabbath, but they were living like, or even worse than, the pagan nations around them. The false prophets of their time, the false teachers, were encouraging these people, telling them that because they were still going to the temple, because they were still worshiping on the Sabbath, they were going through the motions of worship and offering sacrifices to God, that God was going to keep them from the impending judgment from the Babylonians. And so that's where we pick up here now in verse 10. It says, talking about the false prophets, verse 10 says, "Because they led my people astray, saying peace when there is no peace, and because when a flimsy wall is built, they cover it with whitewash. Therefore tell those who cover it with whitewash that it is going to fall. Rain will come in torrents, and I will send hailstones hurling down, and violent winds will burst forth. When the wall collapses, will people not ask you, 'Where is the whitewash you covered it with?' Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says, in my wrath I will unleash a violent wind, and in my anger hailstones and torrents of rain will fall with destructive fury. I will tear down your wall you have covered with whitewash, and will level it to the ground so that its foundation will be laid bare. When it falls, you will be destroyed in it, and you will know that I am the Lord. So I will pour out my wrath against the wall and against those who covered it with whitewash. I will say to you, the wall is gone, and so are those who whitewashed it. Those prophets of Israel who prophesied to Jerusalem and saw visions of peace for her when there was no peace, declares the sovereign Lord." This morning, I'd like to look at Ezekiel 10 here through the lens of self-deception. Self-deception is when someone believes themselves to be that which they are not. It's someone who thinks they are right, but they actually are wrong, but they think they're right. And it is someone that desires not to appear what they really are, but desires to appear what they really are not. So we think about self-deception. I think all of us would agree that lying is a serious thing, right? Now, all of us, at some point in our lives, I think it would be safe to say that all of us have said a lie, something that wasn't completely true. Lies have destroyed marriages, churches, homes, and people. However, as we think about how damaging lies are, I think the ones that we tell others or that others tell us are maybe not the most damaging. I think the one that is the most damaging are the lies that we tell ourselves. In verse 10 here in Ezekiel, it says, when we lie, we lead astray. So if you were going to tell me that this past week when it was so cold, if you would have told me it's nice and sunny outside today, that it's warm out, you should be fine to go out in a t-shirt, and I would believe you and I would go outside in a t-shirt, it wouldn't take me long to figure out that I was lied to, right? The cold would indicate that that was not a truth. I was led astray. And so these false prophets, instead of calling Israel's attention to the serious cracks, the breaches in their foundation, they were telling them, they were whitewashing, hiding the deficiencies, whitewashing the problems that needed to be exposed, giving a pretense of peace when there was no peace. Don't we do this sometimes ourselves as well? I think the common thing when you meet someone is, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Everything's just great, right? That's just a normal response. Is that how it was this morning? Doing great. I couldn't be better. When sometimes just minutes before we kicked the dog out of the way out on the way out to the car, or this morning we were sitting in the car waiting for our wife to get out there because we're running late for church and she's not ready yet, so we're out there blowing the horn, but we're just doing great, right? It's a whitewash. It's a way we cover up what's on the inside. When we whitewash our faults, when we whitewash our realities, it leads to avoiding each other. Our engagement in conversation is generally superficial. Then I can talk about my hobbies, I can talk about my work. Let's just not talk about spiritual application or true fellowship. Things are not always as they appear. I don't know if some of you enjoy taking pictures, I assume. I don't take a whole lot of pictures, but I enjoy pictures like this where it's not how it appears. You take a picture of something in the background to make it look like you are, like this guy is holding up the moon, right? Now that is not me, by the way. But you see it on like the Eiffel Tower, people leaning against the tower, that kind of thing. Just interesting pictures, but they're not what they seem to be. In 2007, I believe, Joshua Bell was a famed violinist, and he was in Boston, and he had performed at a theater there, packed the theater out. Seats were selling for hundreds of dollars a piece. And I believe it was shortly after that, I don't know if it was the next day or not, but Joshua donned jeans, a shabby t-shirt, and a baseball cap, and he went out into the subway, and he played for 43 minutes of playing on the subway there, playing incredibly intricate pieces. He had a Stradivarius violin, I think I'm saying that right. That might mean something to somebody, doesn't to me. But it was made by a legendary violin maker back in 1713. The violin itself was worth, at that time in 2007, about $3.5 million. All the while he was doing this, he was being documented by hidden cameras, and over those 43 minutes, there were 1,100 people have walked by this man playing famous music on a famous instrument. 27 people gave money. 7 people stopped and listened for any considerable amount of time, and he made about $50 for his efforts. Things are not always what they seem to be. James 4:17 says, "Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. In the NLT, it says, "Remember, it is a sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it." Probably all of us can think of a time when we had a thought of something we should do, something good that we could do for someone else, and we didn't do it, right? This past week, one evening, we came home, and I sat down on the recliner in front of the wood stove and propped my feet up, and apparently I fell asleep because I remember waking up. And when I woke up, I saw Lindsay out in the kitchen packing lunches for the next day, and I had a thought, and it was a good thought. I thought that I could go out and I could help her pack lunches for the next day. Now, God also created us people that can choose. We can choose what we do. I had a sense of what was right. I had a sense to do what was right, but I also had a choice to do what I thought was right. So if I choose to do what I believe is right, the story ends there, right? You had a good thought to do something that was right, and you went and did it, and that's the end of the story. But as people of choice, we have a good thought, a thought of something that we can do that is good, that is right, and we choose not to do it is when it gets a little bit more complicated. So I had a thought that I could go help my wife pack lunches, because I'm sure for her, if I would have came and helped pack lunches, she would have felt appreciated that I'm helping and just helping around the house, and thought of her in packing lunches. But I had a choice to do, and if by not going and help her, now I need to start, because my thought is still right? I still had a good thought, the right thought, but now because of I don't act and I don't go do that, now I need to start reasoning in myself to why that thought was no longer a good thought. So as I sat there on the recliner, boy, it was a long day today. I worked hard. It's really, I have to get up earlier than she does in the morning, so I should probably just go take a shower a while and go to bed. I start making excuses. I start trying to rationalize why that thought that I had is no longer really that good of a thought. I'm making excuses for the wrong to appear right, at least for the wrong not to appear wrong. So if I had done simply what I thought was right, that would have been the end of it, but because I didn't do what I thought was right, now I begin to convince myself in this story through the excuses that thought really couldn't be true. And it's called deceiving myself. It's called self-deception. Just for the record, if you care to know if I helped pack lunches or not, I did eventually help pack lunches, but it might have been prodded by my wife too. So anyway, I did end up helping a little bit. But if we find ourselves trying to reason or justify our actions for something, I think it would do us well to go back to the thought. Was it a thought to do good? Was it a right thought? If it was, then just do it. Don't try and reason away. Don't make excuses for not doing it. And I think this can be reversed as well. If you go back to the thought, was it a thought to do something that was not good? Was it a thought to do something bad? Then don't do it. Don't make excuses and try to justify it by watering it down and making it so that it appears right. Unfortunately, we have become experts at making excuses. According to a poll done in 2021, found that the average American makes about 2,190 excuses a year, which breaks down to be about 6 excuses a day that we make to validate our decisions. Unfortunately, excuses are one way that we whitewash over our sin. Other ways that we whitewash over our sin are by denying that we have sinned, where we say, well, I didn't actually do that, I didn't say that, or we whitewash it by admitting sin, but justifying it by circumstances that led to it. So it really, I did do that, but it really wasn't my fault. It was because of A, B, or C. We whitewash over our sin by minimization. It really wasn't that bad. That's maybe not really what happened, we try and minimize our actions, or we say, I didn't mean it like that. And it all points back to self-deceptions. Galatians 6, verse 7 says, Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. I think we're familiar with the sowing and reaping an analogy there. We know that if we plant a corn seed, we're going to get corn. If we plant beans, we get beans. So what happens if we have unresolved anger problem? What happens if we lack discipline in our lives? Eventually we will reap the benefits of that. We'll reap the children or spouse who cower in fear. We'll reap unhealthy appetites because of lack of discipline. When we attempt to whitewash it, when we attempt to cover it up, or we attempt to justify it, reason it in our minds, to make the wrong not wrong. Well, here in back in Ezekiel 13, verse 14, God said, I will break down your whitewashed wall to the ground, and I will expose the foundation, the root of the problem. God says he's going to tear that whitewash away, and he's going to expose the root of the problem, which is our sin. Matthew 7, verse 15, Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. This past week I read a quote that said, in order to beware of the wolves, we first have to acknowledge that wolves exist. Is it even possible that I could have some self-deception in my life? You shall know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? And, we've been talking about this sowing and reaping. Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore by their fruits ye shall know them. And oftentimes it's easier to see self-deception in the life of someone else than it is to see it in ourselves. I believe that's because we are believing an untruth. In order to see that our cover-up is not going to last, we first have to recognize the truth as truth. Verse 21, Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? Then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you that work iniquity. Sobering verses, gut-wrenching verses, is a group of people that thought they were doing the right thing. These people were deceived. Who were they deceived by? I think it was by themselves. On the outside, they were doing the right things. They taught Sunday school, they preached the word, they did many wonderful things, they looked the part, but all the while they were a whitewashed wall. When it came their turn to stand before God, they did everything in their power to convince God that they should be in heaven. Jesus said, I don't know you, depart from me. A group of people that were living in self-deception. Therefore, whosoever heareth these words, these sayings of mine, and doeth them, I will liken him to a wise man which built his house upon a rock. Jesus says, hear the truth. Hearing the truth isn't usually what trips us up. Usually we can hear the truth, but it's a choice then that we have to do with, has to do with what do we do with the truth. Hear the truth and do the truth. So the definition of whitewashing, I will distance myself from the hard realities in order to find another way to make it on my journey. As we think about hard realities, don't know that any of us really enjoy hard things. Ecclesiastes 7, verses 2 to 5, and as we read over this, look for the contrasts in the verses. Which would you rather spend time doing? Doing that which is easy, celebrating, laughing, living it up, or learning lessons from going through loss, tragedy, or mistakes. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by the sadness of the countenance is the heart made better. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the fools is in the house of mirth. It is better to hear rebuke of the wise than for a wise man to hear the song of fools. I think all of us would rather celebrate, rather have fun, than to mourn and experience loss. There's an old saying, as a Phillies fan, I think we take this to heart: it's better to mourn than to celebrate, because as a Phillies fan we do a lot of mourning, right? Not a lot of celebrating. But sorrow is better than laughter. These are hard realities, but they're the better choice. Do we distance ourselves from hard realities? The agenda of a whitewasher is, I will protect myself against the difficulties of life. This becomes my number one priority. As a whitewasher, I despise uncertainty more than I trust in God. I'm not sure if I can trust in God if I don't know what His plan for my life is. And so we demand protection and provide it for ourselves when God doesn't offer it. Questions we ask ourselves as whitewashers is, am I safe? Being in a safe environment is crucial to us, because as somebody that has a facade, somebody that has whitewashed walls, being in an environment where somebody's going to ask me questions that see through my whitewash is not a place that I want to be. So what can I do to guarantee safety? How do I protect myself against the bad things that I fear? How can I protect myself? And oftentimes, character is not the goal of a whitewasher, but safety is. Oftentimes, a whitewasher will fear disaster that is out of their control, things that come my way that I can't control. And Ecclesiastes talked a lot about that, about going through hard things. I don't think any of us would choose to go through something hard, and yet I believe that all of us have experienced some really hard things in our lives. Things that pull us close to Jesus, things that when we come out with a $1 million experience that we wouldn't give $1 to go through again. As a whitewasher, oftentimes, we want you to align yourself with them. It's somebody that is going to be in your back pocket. Help them protect themselves. I know what I'm doing. I don't need help. I got this. I know what I'm doing. Are you really going to be telling me how to do this? And don't tell them about reality. Don't tell them about truth. God's strategy for helping a whitewasher is to allow difficulties that cannot be protected against. God will take us into an area. He'll give us some hard things to work through that we really can't control on our own. And it's going to be up to us in those moments to make a choice to either allow God to trust in God, to allow God to lead our lives, or we're going to rebel against it and go against what God is trying to do for us. So I think the question as a whitewasher, if we have tendencies of being a whitewasher, I think the question that we need to be asking ourselves is, am I in good enough hands to move on into life? Do I trust God to protect me? Do I trust Him enough to take care of me that I can remove the whitewash that I'm trying to cover my life with and just be me? As we close this morning, are you washed white in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed white in the blood of the Lord Jesus Christ, or are you merely whitewashed by him? Jesus is in the business of real cleansing. There's no pretense. There's no whitewashing. Ezekiel 36, and this is in the New King James, says, I will give you a new heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and I will keep my judgments and do them. Heart change is what is needed. It's a good place to start is in our own hearts. There's a story of two men who went to church to pray. One man prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I thank you that I'm not a robber, an evildoer. I thank you that I'm not even like this man here beside me. I fast 2 times a week. I give an offering every time the basket comes. I'm a good person. The other man stood at a distance and wouldn't even look up to heaven, but he fell to his knees and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Which one of these two men had whitewashed walls in their lives? Which one was deceived by self-deception? We started out this morning by asking the question, what would you say is the most important thing in life? I would say the most important thing is in life is a realization that I am not number one in my life. And then number 2, I believe the next most important thing is a strong connection with the one who is in control of my life. Let's kneel for a word of prayer.